Greetings. Okay, so good morning. First, I would like to thank you all for coming here. It's looking to be a jam-packed couple of days, and I'm really excited about it. Also, I wanted to thank our sponsors, the Center for Science, Technology, Medicine, and Society, the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management, the Li Ka-shing Program in Gender and Science, the Department of Gender and Women's Studies, the Anthropology Department, and the Townsend Center for the Humanities, whose mid-February grant deadline is a large reason for why a lot of you are here, because otherwise I'm not sure I would have gotten so hasty about it. And of course, the National Science Foundation, whose sponsorship of my postdoctoral fellowship is what put me at Berkeley in the first place. So thank you, NSF. I also would really want to thank Christine Yoshihara, who's not in this room, and Diana Ware, who is, for their incredible help and hard work in preparing for the conference. Christine designed the poster, which I'm sure a lot of you downloaded and printed right away, because it was really cool looking. And she did, obviously, lots of other things. And Diana did pretty much all of the hard work of getting us rooms, the catering, you know, the herding cats of conference. You feel all the animal metaphors are just waiting for you. And I also wanted to thank Corey Hayden, my postdoc mentor, who initially discouraged me from a love-oriented conference. She basically was like, "You're going to bring in a lot of weird people." I was like, "No, but it's important." But whose advice, therefore, pushed me to kind of do a better job of explaining just what kinds of difficult loves and other affects this conference is about. So I ended up sending her an email where I was like, "I am doing the love conference." And also Lindsay Crawford. I say Lindsay because I kept misspelling her name for several months, and she was kind enough not to point it out to me. Anyways, who also did a lot of administrative work. And James, our fabulous videographer. So yes. Okay, so now when I began my part of organizing this conference, I found myself telling people more often than not, and where is Justin? Anyways, yeah, I had a bunch of email exchanges where I was like, no, it's funny weird, not funny haha. You know, as in funny kinds of love, funny weird. And so it took me a while to realize that I was working against a tide of cute cat videos and whatnot in my earnest efforts to get at the complicated relationships and affects that suffuse contemporary human-animal interactions and their ethics. So I thought I would open with a story, which in a sense I think is part of the poster's story for me. So this is a story from an animal shelter, and it's a story that happens in animal shelters everywhere. And I think that this is a story that helps me describe, in the elusive ways that I think of this, how love and ethics get tangled up, ways that might seem from the outside as not necessarily loving or ethical, even as they are deeply ethical to the folks who live them. So the story begins at an open admission shelter where I volunteer. So there's language battles about whether you say kill or no kill or open admission or closed admission. Anyways, just highlighting that for you. So Casey, a dog who I walked, played ball with, and loved on many times, was out with another volunteer. He's a big dude, Casey. A small dog, off-leash, ran up to Casey, barking and growling. Casey started barking and growling back, and the volunteer, seeking to prevent contact between the dogs, interposed her body between Casey and the small dog. And in this moment, Casey did what dog people call redirect, which is fancy talk for displacing fear and its Janus face aggression. He bit her on the leg instead of the dog that was running at them both. Casey got put into bite quarantine, and for the next week or so, there were extensive debates about what had happened, who was at fault, whether Casey could or should be saved. Ultimately, another volunteer, a woman who deeply cared for and I would venture to say loved Casey, made arrangements for a local rescue organization to pull him so that she could foster him at her house, outside of the stressful shelter environment, which the shelter staff agreed to after a lot of debate, obviously. Things went well for Casey for a while, a couple weeks maybe, and he made progress in training. And keep in mind that shelter dogs, part of the reason they're such a handful is they don't even know about going up to the bathroom outside, when they first come out, because they've been living in or they don't need to do that necessarily. But then he had another incident, and the volunteer who fostered him needed a fair bit of stitches. And so she made a decision that broke her heart. She had him put down. Out of fear for him and love for him, and out of care and love for the other humans and dogs with whom he could not be trusted to interact well or really safely. There are a lot of intimacies in animal shelters. Staff and volunteers walk dogs, clean up after animals, play with cats, pet rabbits. They train dogs how to sit, cats how not to scratch. I really don't know what goes on with the rabbits, to be honest. These contacts build what I like to think of as a kind of queer kinship, multiple forms of intimacy without relatedness. These attachments are shaped by love and care, surely, but also by responsibility and even frustration. I remember recently saying in exasperation to one of the dogs I take out regularly, "You're never going to get adopted if you keep acting like this." These attachments are also shaped by race, gender, and poverty. I remember walking a shelter dog recently and having an older man join us for the space of a walk. And he started telling me, what's going on with shelter dogs. And it was really interesting because he was like, it's not only that people breed dogs in their backyards to make money, and those dogs, through various paths, end up at the shelter often. But also that, quote, when there's a lot of poverty, alcohol, stress, a dog's going to feel what's going on. His sense that the joint vulnerability and shared emotional trauma of multiple oppressions and the addictions they cultivate makes dogs behave in ways that often lead them into animal shelters is important to remember here, I think, in the context of a conference about animals and love. A dog's going to feel what's going on. People get attached to shelter animals, and they get attached in interesting ways. Late last summer, a large number of dead and emaciated dogs were discovered at a prominent dog refuge in Texas, Spindletop. I'm sure a lot of you have followed this one. Many of these dogs had been sent there because, like Casey, they could not handle contact with other dogs, and were often selective about humans as well. Writing about the case, Jessica Dolce, her blog is notesfromadogwalker.com, it's pretty good, a prominent advocate, argues that if one is considering such a sanctuary as an option, which is to say that if the options are so narrow and the dog's future world so small, sometimes, quote, putting them to sleep in your arms can be the greatest act of love you can give your pet. To me, Casey's case and many others like it, and that I and no doubt many of us have encountered over the years, times when love conflicts with trust, conflicts with responsibilities to multiple entities, reveals how attachments between animals and humans in many places, but especially, I think, in shelters, so often refuse the equation of love with compassion with a straightforward ethics oriented towards preserving life. Casey's case and others like it demonstrate instead complex enmeshments of care for animals and humans, responsibility towards animals and humans, and ethics that, frankly, change in different situations because there is no other way for ethics to happen. These are funny kinds of love. One final small story. A number of shelters across the US and elsewhere have begun to take up practices to counter animals' isolation from each other. So, for example, there are kitty condos and even cat habitats, or what I like to call cat-a-tats, where multiple cats share living spaces in ways that reduce their boredom and loneliness. And there are also play groups where multiple dogs are carefully introduced and monitored as they play with each other. So you see, normally shelter dogs are not allowed any contact with other dogs, especially because you have to have them on leash, and for dog people, often leashes produce bad interactions. So the play groups help dogs come out of their shells. Many fearful dogs, and it's really a lovely thing to see, are just like completely transformed by the presence of another playful dog. Not to mention that they quite obviously increase dogs' adoption rates. Play groups are also fun for the humans who engineer them. It is much more pleasant and often hilarious to spend an afternoon watching dogs bound around together in exuberance than it is to try and penetrate that exuberance with any kind of training technique when it is located at the other end of the leash. I bring up the play groups here because they are a space where dogs develop attachments to, and I think affection for, each other. Even dogs with rather intense barrier aggression towards other dogs become total clowns in these spaces, inviting contact through wiggly play vows and enticements to chase. And I bring up the playgroups because they illustrate another funny kind of love, or at least affection, one in which humans are peripheral even as they provide the conditions of its possibility. And these kinds of funny dog loves make me realize, actually, that I lied earlier, because these highly social interactions among dogs are often delightful and hilarious. My strong sense is that this is so for the dogs as well as the humans. which is to say that I hope we might also get to consider funny haha, in addition to funny weird, kinds of love in our discussions today and tomorrow. So thank you, and I very much look forward to all the upcoming talks. We are going to be doing strict timekeeping also, but there's this whole notion of Berkeley time that I'm battling against every day. But yes, so we have our first panel coming up, which I forgot the title of. Hasten is